Assalamualaikum and a very good day. My name is Ahmad Syakir Amzar, and today me and my groupmate are going to discuss about the topic of the differences between rural poverty and also urban poverty. So basically the thesis statement here is reviewing the conceptual arguments and the existing literature, examining the intensity of urban versus rural poverty, urban and rural inequality, and also whether the urban poverty is more challenging as compared to the rural poverty. Okay, the first point based on the article is the poor urban planning and lack of good governance. And the supporting details is as follows. According to the International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, urban development policies often magnify the risk of flash floods, given the policies are usually planned and implemented without the participation of the urban poor, which also results in their displacement. And then the second supporting detail is state authorities fail in their responsibilities to respond effectively to local needs in participatory, transparent and accountable manner. The third one is policies are not revised or new policies not implemented to counterbalance the pressure of population growth on service capacities and address the failures of urban governance. And then the last one is inappropriate policies at both the central and local event. Corruption and cumbersome regulatory requirements in cities also lead to a variety of deprivation, such as inadequate infrastructure and environmental services, limited access to schools, and also healthcare and society exclusion. The second point is unequal opportunity of education and rights to education. The first supporting detail is research shows that limited access to quality education for the urban poor means that they cannot give this necessary to skills to secure more stable and higher paying employment. And the second one is, despite free schooling, indirect costs such as uniform, textbook and supplies often make it prohibitive for households with very limited economic means. The third one is the transition between primary and secondary school is particularly tenuous, as many children leave school to find work in order to supplement household income, illustrating the difficult economic decision that poor urban families have to make. And then the last one is urban poor communities may simply not have access to enough school facilities, such as in the case of Kibera, one of the largest slums in Nairobi. As for conclusion based on the article, in order to address challenges that urban poverty poses to a growing population on a global scale, the following measures should be taken, such as promoting rights-based and participative development policy and also good governance. Development policy that fully consider the human rights of the poor that should be considered.
Point number 3. Poverty is higher in urban areas than in rural areas. With supporting details, 1. A study by Rebellion 2007 provided ration of the urban to the rural poverty line. They found that urban poverty are 30% higher than rural poverty. Second, the World Bank Poverty and Inequality of Handbook. Horton and Kenker 2009 quote estimates of rural and urban poverty in Cambodia, with poverty lines 2,470 reals per capita per day in Phnom Penh, 2,093 for the urban areas and 1,077 for the rural areas in 1999. Third, poverty gap turned out to be higher in urban areas than in the rural areas. Using criterion of $1 a day, the study reports that the average income of those living below this line in 2002 was 73 cents urban areas compared to 76 in rural areas. A rebellion also point out poor market integration and geographically non-traded goods can lead to substantial cost of living difference between rural and urban areas. A cost living index capture, urban areas are more higher priced than rural areas. Point number 4. Urban poverty can be challenging for human capital. With supporting details, 1. Haddad, Rule and Garrett, 1999, find that in the majority of the 14 countries they studied, the absolute number of poor and undernourished individuals living in urban areas had increased, as had the share of the overall poverty and undernourishment coming from urban areas. Given this and the existing state of knowledge on various aspects of urban poverty and undernutrition, they argued for more research in this area. Second, the State of World Cities Report, UN Habitat 2006, discussed the penalty paid by the urban poor who live in slums across the developing world are least as bad and not worse than the rural poor. Densely congested areas, polluted atmosphere, lack of access to infrastructure, public service and more than all social segregation means that urban poverty is actually more chronic and dehumanizing than rural poverty. Third supporting detail is living condition means that the urban poor are subject to greater health risks than their rural counterparts. These health problems are further aggravated by the low-level immunization, lack of ready access to affordable health care. It was found, for example, by Sridhar and Reddy 2014 that very few slum dwellers were even aware the government health insurance program. Fourth, low-income urban residents and substantial proportion of rural residents share similar challenges in securing sufficient food, a healthy diet. The report of IED points out that urban residents face additional constraints and affect their food security, which are, in many cases, related to non-income dimensions. Dehydration disease is a good indicator of overall environmental hygiene and food safety. In many cases, related to malnutrition, the higher incidence of dehydration disease among low-income urban population is closely related to unhealthy living environment. Conclusion of the article. The discussion implies that the intensity of urban poverty and urban inequality is higher than of the rural poverty and rural inequality in the case of most Asian countries. Policymakers need to come up with innovative ways to make urbanization benefit the urban poor as well as the non-poor.
Point number 5. Ethnic issues. The educational achievement of Bumiputra and rural students in disciplines which are very much fundamental to the economy was considerably lower than the urban and non-Bumiputra students. This led to an academic lacuna between these two sectors. If the policymakers are turned a blind eye to injustice and refuse to create promising arrangements, fragmentations, fractions would be unavoidable and turmoil between ethnic groups would become worse. The Malays are dominant in the rural poverty, and this initiate policymakers to figure out the national level conceptualization of poverty. The National Economic Plan 2010 NEP, poverty eradication mainly focused on Malay rural population. The policies and initiatives turn ethically motivated. Point number 6. Migrants workers issues. The current development policies of Malaysia are highly influenced by globalization and liberalization, and this lead to direct and indirect implication on activities in relation to poverty. An increased influx of overseas employees aggravated on IOP in the post-war repercussion of 2008. This phenomenon induced a deliberate discussion in relation to the foreign labour policy for various reasons. NAIR 2010 is concerned about this issue and stated the increased invasion of 20% of foreign labour force makes an impact on poverty issues and human resource development. The contribution of overseas employees for local economy, remittance for their country origin, perceived competition in the local labour market between local migrant workers and the potential arrival of a hailing number of overseas labour attributes to reserve unrest all written pressing concerns. For the conclusion, action should be taken to deal the negative attitudes regarding to a poor status. A priority should be given to empower the community and encourage mutual support and attentiveness among its members. The complex dynamics of poverty to be triumphed with a multidisciplinary approach, and poverty alleviation tasks should be focused on the enhancement of human skills, innovativeness and knowledge of the poor.
In rural areas of Malaysia, landliness is a significant issue with adverse effect on the agriculture sector and local communities. Low income and seasonal work. Farmer and agricultural workers face the risk of poverty and social exclusion due to their limited earnings and the fluctuated nature of agricultural labor. So this situation can perpetuate poverty across generation, particularly among farming families. For example, a family who relies solely on seasonal work may struggle to generate sufficient income throughout the year, making it difficult to escape poverty. Transformation of agriculture. So the shift from state-controlled farm to private ownership has led to challenges such as fragmented land holdings and small-scale economic activities. This factor contribute to poverty and exclusion among farmers and their family. For instance, when farms are divided into some smaller plots, it becomes harder for farmers to cultivate crop efficiently and generate substantial profit. Third, government policy. In some cases, the government may prevent landlessness peasants from cultivating land as a part of their own development scheme. This restriction aims to encourage their participation in government-led agricultural initiative. However, this approach denies landlessness individuals the opportunity to access and utilize agricultural land to improve their livelihood. Fourth, debt and land confiscation. Farmers often report borrowing money to support their families, leading to a cycle of indebtedness. Many farmers rely on money lenders who charge high interest rates, sometimes as much as 100%. With low incomes, farmers may be compelled to borrow repeatedly, eventually reaching a point where they are unable to repay their loans. In such case, landlords and moneylenders may confiscate the farmer's land as collateral, exacerbating landlessness. The vicious circle among rural areas is a complex issue that hinders their development and perpetuates poverty. Firstly, the lack of economic opportunities in rural areas result in a low education level and limited access to healthcare, poor nutrition, and inadequate infrastructure. This situation creates a cycle of poverty as individuals struggle to improve their circumstances without proper resource and support. For example, in remote village in Malaysia, limited access to quality education and healthcare service lead to lower level of literacy and health outcome among the population. So secondly, unfavorable demographic condition exacerbate the challenge faced by rural areas in Malaysia. Low population density, a high percentage of elderly individuals, and low birth rates contribute to a diminishing workforce and a lack of youthful energy in these areas. As young people migrate to urban areas in search of better opportunities, the demographic imbalance further worsens, making it harder to revitalize the local economy and infrastructure. Moreover, the presence of a low-skilled labor force deters domestic and foreign companies from investing in rural areas in Malaysia. Industry may not be well developed and there may be a scarcity of jobs that offer sustainable wages. This leads to a limited labor market and perpetuates the cycle of unemployment and poverty in rural areas. Finally, the low level of demand in rural markets pose a significant barrier to investment. The small size of the market discourages entrepreneurs from establishing industry on a large scale, resulting in low productivity and income. For instance, in rural areas of Malaysia where poverty is prevalent, entrepreneurs are unlikely to invest in establishing modern factories that produce goods that the local population cannot afford to purchase. Breaking this cycle requires targeted intervention to improve education, healthcare, infrastructure, as well as some effort to attract investment and create sustainable jobs in these areas.
As for the critical comments based on the article is, the tone of the author is stern but with concern, and then the intended audience is the authority and the government. The purpose of the article is to enlighten the factor influencing urban poverty, and then the additional comments about the article is very useful because Malaysia is one of the developing countries that's struggling with urbanization, which leads to urban poverty.
This article shows that the tone of the author is formal. The article targeted the public and the government to give awareness and acknowledgement about urban poor to them. Next is article purpose. This article purpose is to review the question whether urban poverty is more challenging than rural poverty. Additional comment about the article is, the article presents relevant facts and statistics about poverty in Asia. So this gives us solid evidence and confidence in reviewing this article.
Tone bias for Article 3 is the tone of the author is informative and objective. Intended audience for Article 3 is the audience intended is general public and the government. The purpose of the article is to provide an overview and analysis of the efforts, initiatives undertaken by the Malaysian government to alleviate poverty within the country. Additional comments about the article for Article 3 is, the article provides a comprehensive overview of poverty reduction policies in Malaysia, examining trends, strategies, and the challenges. For tone or bias, Article 4, the tone of the author is informative. Intended audience, Article 4, the audience intended is the member state and public. So the purpose of article is to eradicating poverty and social exclusion in rural areas. Additional comment about the article, this article shows that the effect of the consequences of poverty and social exclusion are widespread, affecting the overall well-being, education, healthcare, and economic prospect of individuals living in this area.